In the previous video, we saw about the overpass, how the superior side can pass in front of the pawn in order to occupy a critical square on the 6th rank, assuming that the pawn is on the 4th rank, in order to win. Now, in this case, however, the king is not situated on the diagonal that passes in front of the pawn. So in this case, if black were to try to, if white were to try to move forward 2 squares and then try to make that overpass, then it won't get there on time because black will stop him. And so the overpass doesn't work. However, there is the underpass passing behind the pawn that will work, because the underpass will allow white to get to h5. Okay, h5 would be a critical square for white, assuming that black is not on h7. Okay, because if white can get to h5 and white has the opposition, then white will be able to win. So so this is a winning game, because white needs to go for h5, and as long as if white, again, usually the critical square would be on the 6th rank, but there's no way that black can have the opposition on the h rank when white is on h5. Okay, because as you can see, let's just play it out and see how it goes. Black goes to I'm sorry, no, this is the wrong one. Black goes to f2, and white goes to f2. Black is trying to get him, but white gets to h5. So once white controls h5, and again, here's the critical thing. Now, h5 is not the critical square. It's actually one of the squares in the 6th rank. But black is trying to prevent white, obviously. Black has to move to g7 in order to prevent white from getting to the 6th, in order to prevent white from going to h6. But it doesn't help black, because white now gets the opposition against black. And this allows white to exercise a turning maneuver, as we've seen in previous videos. And so now white will be able to occupy a critical square in the 6th rank. You see, now black must give ground because white has the opposition, and now white controls a critical square in the 6th rank for a pawn on the 4th rank. So this is a winning game for white. Now the actual technique of how to win this is as follows. Now this is the best play for black. Black is trying to wedge itself into the corner to try to get a draw somehow by a stalemate. Hopefully, if, for example, if white starts pushing the pawn, then eventually black won't be able to move anywhere except into the queening square. And at that point, it'll be a draw because black won't be able to move anywhere. So so this is the best move for black. But however, what white needs to do is white moves into g6 in front of the pawn, and now black's best move, of course, and the only move, is g8. And now black has the opposition because it's white's turn to act. Now here's the thing. White's pawn is still on the 4th rank, so white can actually utilize the tempo of pushing the pawn in order to gain the opposition. So white pushes the pawn, and now white has the opposition. Black must move. Black's best move is to move back into the corner, and now white can occupy a critical square for a pawn on the 5th rank, and now white also controls the queening square. So now it's an easy win. There are other ways for white to win. The other ways are a little more complicated. Here, let's see what would happen if let's see what would happen if white instead pushes the pawn. Now this will also win. The reason we know that it's going to win is because white still controls a critical square. When the pawn is on the 5th rank, then one rank in front of the pawn is considered a critical square for white. So this is a win for white, regardless of where black is, regardless of whether white has the opposition or not. However, white needs to be careful here, because after black moves to h7, which is the best move, this is why it's the best move for black, because now black has gone back to h8, and now if white pushes the pawn, it's a draw. So now white needs to be careful. Now white needs to go back to the g6 square, and then go back to h6, and now it is safe for white to push the pawn, because now white will have the opposition, and black will have to move into the queening square, and then black will be squeezed out of the winning square. So this is just a little more complicated way to win. So this is why the most direct way would have been, at this point, for white to go into g6 instead of pushing the pawn. But either way wins. Now let's see what would happen. This is a starting position. Let's see what would happen if white incorrectly moves into e2. Okay, this is a mistake. Why is it a mistake? Very simple, because again, white needs to focus on the critical square. The critical square in our case would be one of the squares on the 6th rank. Now, in order to get there, the only one that white can really occupy is, before black could get there, is the h6 square. And in order to get to the h6 square, white will need to control the h5 square. And if white controls the h5 square with opposition, then white will be able to control one of the squares on the 6th rank. And so the key here is the h5 square. The h5 square is really important. The h5 square would be a stepping stone toward the 6th rank. So so moving into the diagonal here, which is blocked by a pawn, is no good. Rather, white should do the underpass, since it cannot make an overpass. So as we can see, let's just play it out. Now it doesn't really matter here what happens. Black can either move to e7 or to g7. If black moves to e7, then what did I say? G7? No, I meant to say e6. Either e7 or e6. The reason black is moving to e7 is because black wants to get the opposition against white. Okay, there's 3 squares between them, and it's white's turn to move, so that's opposition for black, and so black knows that this is a drawn game. But as you can see, okay, now black has the opposition. But even if black moves into e6, it's also a drawn game. Now here it's going to play out a little different. Here white has the opposition. However, at this point, there's nothing white can do to win, because white cannot occupy a critical square. If white tries, for example, to go to f5, then black will simply move here, and now white will lose the pawn. And there really isn't anything that white can do now to win. If white pushes the pawn, then it'll also be a draw, because white will never be able to occupy a critical square. This is the classical blockade position, where black is directly in front of the pawn, and once that blockade position is reached, it's a drawn game. So, so like I said, in this case, it doesn't really matter. Once white is here, black can choose either e7, e6, and they'll both be a draw. So, so again, this is the starting position, e1. So black, the only diagonal that's open is right here, and so white. White needs to seize this diagonal and utilize that in order to make the underpass and control h5, and then from h5, white will be able to occupy one of the critical squares in the 6th rank. Now, if white were to be on, let's say, d1, okay, that would be a draw once again, because white would not be able to make the underpass in time, and of course, white cannot move on this diagonal right here, because it's obstructed by a pawn. So white needs to move either on this diagonal, the overpass, or the underpass, and so white is wasting a move here to try to get to a diagonal that it can actually pass in order to get to a critical square. and white just cannot make that in time. So if white was situated on d1, it would be a draw. If white was situated on c1, it would also be a draw. If white were to be on c2, then it would be making the overpass, and it would also win. That would be an easy win. But since white is on e1, white must make the underpass instead, and that'll also result in a win for white. Okay, so I hope this helps. To recap, what we illustrated in this movie is how white executes an underpass in order to get to a critical square and win the game. Now in this case, getting to the 6th rank is not as easy. White needs to first occupy the critical square on h5, which is actually not the critical square for a pawn on the 4th rank. But since white gets there with opposition, therefore white is able to occupy the 6th rank. What do I mean with opposition? As we've seen, okay, at this point, black must move into g7, otherwise white will easily occupy h6, which is the critical square. So at this point, black is forced to go to g7, and now white seizes the opposition by moving into g5, and it's black's turn to act, and now white is able to control a critical square in the 6th rank. If black moves the other way, then white controls the h6 square. Either way, white will control a critical square. And at this point, it's a win for white. But again, white must be careful so that it doesn't result in a draw through a stalemate.